Clinton Township, Michigan, the 31st of August, 1994, 20 minutes to 3 in the morning. Two officers stop a teenager sitting alone in a parked Pontiac. He says he is waiting for a friend. They ask him to open the trunk. Inside, a toolbox, padlocked and taped shut, packed among glass jars, lantern parts, and the dial of an old clock, and more than 50 cubes of grey powder, each folded into foil. The boy tells them not to touch the toolbox. He tells them it is radioactive. They have no way to measure it, and no idea whether to believe him. They log the car as a possible bomb and have it towed. It is not a bomb. 17-year-old David Hahn has been building a nuclear reactor in a garden shed. This is his case file. To understand what was in that trunk, you have to go back 7 years to a book. David Hahn was 10 years old when his step-grandfather gave him a 1960s edition of the Golden Book of Chemistry Experiments, a children's manual from a time when a home laboratory was thought a wholesome hobby and the instructions arrived without warnings. He read it the way other children read adventure stories, and then he began to work his way through it. His first laboratory was the basement at home, where, still a boy, he knocked himself unconscious mixing chloroform, and later set off an explosion that left him semi-conscious on the floor, his eyebrows smoking. By his early teens, the experiments had migrated from the basement to the backyard, and from ordinary chemistry towards something with a far longer half-life. At 14, he earned a Boy Scout merit badge in atomic energy, the only boy in his troop ever to attempt it. To pass, he built a model reactor out of a juice can, coat hangers, soda straws, and kitchen matches. It was meant to end there. For David, the toy version was where the real work began. The badge was one piece of a much larger ambition. David was trying to collect a sample of every element in the periodic table, the naturally occurring ones, and then the radioactive ones too. Somewhere in that pursuit, he found the idea of a breeder reactor, a nuclear reactor that produces more fuel than it consumes. He decided he would build one himself, in the potting shed behind his mother's house. The obstacle to building a reactor is an obvious one. You need radioactive material, and no one sells it to a teenager. David solved this the way he solved every problem, by reading and by refusing to be in a hurry. He learned that a household smoke detector holds a fleck of americium, a man-made metal born in nuclear reactors that has no business in a child's hands. He bought smoke detectors by the dozen and wrote to the manufacturers, claiming a school project needed more. He learned that the mantles inside old camping lanterns were coated with thorium, a naturally radioactive metal, and that the glowing numbers on antique clocks were painted with radium, the element that had once eaten into the jaws of the women who painted them. He drove to antique shops and bought the clocks not to keep time, but to scrape their dials. From gun sites he took tritium, a radioactive form of hydrogen. Each of these materials, on its own, was legal and all but harmless, and he was gathering them into something that was neither. He kept careful records, and when he needed technical guidance, he wrote to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the federal agency responsible for exactly these materials. Introducing himself as a high school physics teacher, an official wrote back. Over a series of letters, a representative of the United States government explained to an anonymous Michigan teenager how radioactive elements behave and how they can be handled and separated. One material he could not simply unscrew from a household object: uranium. He went looking for it himself first, driving the shoreline of Lake Huron with a Geiger counter, a handheld meter that clicks faster the more radiation it finds, hunting for radioactive rock, and came back with a trunk full of pitch blender, a black uranium ore. When that proved too weak, he took the bureaucratic route. He wrote to a firm in Czechoslovakia that sold uranium to universities, posing again as a professor, and asked for samples. The company obliged, and the name of that supplier, David said, had been given to him by the same Nuclear Regulatory Commission. His laboratory was the potting shed behind his mother's house. Patty Hahn had no notion of what her son was doing a few steps from her back door, that he was working there for hours at a stretch, occasionally in a gas mask, more often in nothing at all. The work was concentration. A single lantern mantle or clock dial holds too little radioactive material to matter. David's method was to strip it out and gather it, turning a great deal of the harmless into a little of the dangerous. He cooked thorium over an open flame to purify it, using lithium he peeled by hand from $1,000 worth of camera batteries. He handled radium with coffee filters and kitchen pickle jars. By the summer of 1994, he had assembled what he proudly called his reactor. It was, in truth, a neutron source, a device that emits free neutrons, the particles that make nuclear fission possible. Packed inside a bored-out block of lead, it would never sustain a chain reaction, and in that narrow sense, it had failed. But it was working. It was throwing off neutrons, and neutrons do something particular. Passing through ordinary matter, they can leave it radioactive. David watched the readings climb. Week by week, the shed grew hotter, until the counter registered radiation more than 1,000 times what the surroundings should have shown. Then it began registering that radiation from outside the shed altogether. He could pick it up 5 houses down the street. This is the detail that separates David Hahn from a merely reckless boy. He understood the danger precisely enough to be frightened by it. So he began, methodically, to take the reactor apart, hiding the thorium in a shoebox, leaving the radium and americium in the shed, and loading most of the rest into the trunk of his car, meaning to move it somewhere safer. He was still mid-disassembly on the night the police found him, drawn to the street, as it happened, by a neighbour's report of someone stealing tyres from a parked car. When the measurements from his trunk came back, they were high enough to trigger the Federal Radiological Emergency Response Plan, the protocol written for serious nuclear accidents. And then, for 10 months, almost nothing happened. The radioactive shed sat in the middle of the neighbourhood through the autumn, the winter, and into the following summer, before an EPA crew in sealed suits finally arrived on the 26th of June, 1995, to take it apart, panel by panel, and haul it, with the earth beneath it, to a radioactive waste site in the Utah desert. By then, most of the evidence was already gone. Afraid she might lose the house if the full extent of the radiation came out, Patty Hahn had gathered up much of what her son had hidden and thrown it out with the ordinary rubbish before officials arrived. The neutron source, the purified thorium, the radium, David's best and most dangerous work, went out days before, mistaken for garbage. What makes this case worth reopening is not the boy. It is the shelf behind him, the ordinary retail shelf that supplied him. Radioactivity entered everyday life in the early 20th century as a mark of quality. Radium was painted onto clock hands and watch dials so they would glow in the dark. The very same luminous paint had, a generation earlier, killed the young women who applied it. The radium girls, poisoned by the dials David would one day scrape for their radium. Thorium made a lantern mantle burn whiter. Americium let a smoke detector sense smoke. Tritium made a gun sight glow. None of it was concealed, and all of it was legal, because each individual product held an amount of radioactive material judged too small to cause harm. That reasoning held for a single unit and collapsed under David's method, which was simply to accumulate. The thorium in one lantern mantle is negligible. The thorium from several hundred mantles chemically stripped out and concentrated in a single shed is the same element in a form that is anything but, because with radiation, quantity is the whole of the danger. The regulations rested on the quiet assumption that no one would trouble to collect it. His neutron source added a second, sharper hazard. Most radiation stops at the skin or at a sheet of metal. Neutrons do not. They pass deep into matter, and through a process called neutron activation, they can render previously stable material radioactive. The walls, the tools, the dust, the body of anyone standing nearby. Such a device does not sit still as a hazard. It spreads. And radiation gives the body no warning it can feel. No heat, no smell, no pain accompanies the doses that quietly break the DNA inside a cell over months. The damage is silent and it accumulates, legible only to an instrument. David held the instrument. By one official estimate, as many as 40,000 people lived within range of his mother's shed. None of them held an instrument. Most were told nothing at all. The rest were told there had been a chemical spill. No radioactive material is known to have escaped the shed, and no illness was ever traced back to it. What unsettles about the case is not what happened to the people nearby. It is how close it came, and how little any of them knew. David Hahn was never charged. Investigators concluded that he had set out to build a reactor rather than a weapon, and that no statute cleanly fit what he had actually done. He finished high school, and shortly after his shed was carried away, he was awarded the rank of Eagle Scout. He declined the medical examination that officials pressed on him. Whatever dose he had absorbed across those years, bent over the workbench, was therefore never measured, and the cost to his own body remains to this day unknown. The years that followed did not arrange themselves into a moral. He enlisted in the Navy and served aboard a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, then joined the Marines. He was later diagnosed with schizophrenia, the same illness that had shadowed his mother before she took her own life. In 2007, he was arrested once more, this time for prizing smoke detectors from the corridors of his apartment building. The photograph taken that day shows his face covered in open sores. On the 27th of September 2016, David Hahn died at the age of 39 from a combination of alcohol, fentanyl, and an antihistamine. Nothing in the law was changed in response to what he had built. The smoke detectors, the lantern mantles, the glowing dials all remain on the shelf. The gap he stepped through was never sealed. A boy of 17 assembled a working neutron source out of the things his neighbours kept in kitchen drawers and camping kits. And the coldest fact in the file is not that he managed it, but that the shelf he took it all from looks exactly the same today. One question for the comments: should the materials David gathered still sit on open shelves? The next case on this channel, a doctor who traced a whole city's outbreak to a single water pump and had its handle removed. This is the sealed ward.